My name is Evelyn Wainwright, and I can still hear the soft, final clap of my father's drawer the afternoon he died. It was November 14th, 2011. The house smelled of lemon oil and old paper, and light slanted through the parlor windows, turning the dust into a field of tiny stars. The letter I found later that day wasn't some cinematic revelation. It was just folded twice, tucked behind a stack of canceled checks in an old oak drawer. At first, I thought it was just a relic from the past. By nightfall, it had become an accusation, rewriting the entire map of my childhood. You see, the Wainwrights had roots like the old elms on Benefit Street, deep, proud, and, as I was about to discover, sometimes dishonest. My father, Thomas Wainwright, was a story of self-made dignity. He built a successful construction business where politics and asphalt meet. We were raised on that story, entitled, we thought, to his silence and his charity. But this letter, written in faded blue ink, was dated July 10th, 1981. The first line was a list of names with small numbers beside them, and the word trusts was underlined 3 times. As I sat on the parlor floor and read, the room started to blur. The handwriting belonged to a stranger, but the way my father's name was written, with both reverence and grievance, it felt intimate. I knew, with the certainty of a child stumbling upon a secret, that I had walked into sacrilege. The next day, I started digging. I pulled bank records going back to 1968, the year he incorporated Wainwright Development. My hands shook as I saw ledger entries labeled consulting, donation, and one that just hummed with implication, equipment, City of Providence. I didn't yet know that each discovery would force us to excavate not just finances, but memory itself. The first real shock came from a shoebox of old, reel-to-reel audio tapes my father had recorded in his study, labeled For Emergencies, Family. He was meticulous about his voice, a habit from his Navy days. The tapes creaked with old plastic, and then there was his voice. Not the man who presided over church on Sundays, but lower, more like a weathered negotiator, listing numbers and names with a chilling clinical calm. One tape, dated February 2nd, 1984, described a meeting at a yacht club in Newport with a councilman, Harold Avery, and a contractor named Luis Moretti. My throat went dry. Harold Avery was the man at the center of a huge municipal scandal in '86, a scandal our family had always dismissed as newspaper exaggeration. On those tapes, my father also spoke of someone he only called M, a silhouette in the dark. He'd inhale, the reel would whir like a heartbeat, and he'd say, "There are comforts you give people who keep the city moving." It was the soft, careful language of concealment. I called my sister, Margaret. She's a physician, 3 years younger, with our father's nose and a much steadier temperament. We sat in the dim kitchen and played the tape. The voices felt like ghosts walking into our lives. Margaret placed the cassette down and said quietly, "Eve, this could ruin us." Our first instinct was to hide it, to burn it, to bury it, that primitive reflex to protect the family name. But secrecy is brittle. The more we tried to shield the truth, the more it shredded. I started matching names from the letter to old tax returns. I found payments to a foundation that only existed on paper and recurring payments to people in our lives, disguised as maintenance and consultancy. A pattern was emerging. The Wainwrights, it seemed, were architects of a social structure that required favors to stay upright. Then, on a scrap of ledger paper, I found a note in my father's quick pencil scrawl. For M. Trust, 100K, Bridgeport, 377. That shorthand was a map to Betrayal. A few calls to lawyers in Bridgeport uncovered a deed transfer dated March 3rd, 1977, for a disused warehouse. It was bought by a shell company whose signatory had the initials ML. Those initials matched a name in my mother's old address book, Mary Ann Lowell, a woman who used to be a fixture at our dinner parties. On one of the tapes, my father had said of her, "She kept things safe." That phrase opened a corridor filled with shadows. I started to see the scaffolding of his secret life: shell corporations, off-book transfers, a network of favors crisscrossing Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Manhattan. Every piece of paper rewrote a memory. A stained napkin from a dinner in 1978, which my mother had kept, now looked different. The names scribbled on it weren't just guests, they were part of the transaction. Our comfort, I realized, had been purchased with silence. Confronting these receipts felt like confronting his portrait and asking, "Who were you?" The answer was both banal and monstrous, a pragmatic man whose pragmatism had stepped over every line. The revelations kept coming. I found letters between my father and a woman named Claire Donovan, dating from 1985 to 1990. They were restrained but intimate. "I know you think of me in quiet hours," one read. Claire had worked at the urban planning department. A photo tucked behind one letter showed her shaking my father's hand at a ribbon cutting for a new park. The letters transformed what looked like campaign donations into something deeply personal. When I showed Margaret, she just said, "He was a man with appetites." Her words tolled like a bell. Our choices, to expose or conceal, were about to split the family apart. I found more notes, typed and tucked in an envelope labeled "Conditions, CM." They were instructions. Keep city quiet, no prosecutions, maintain legacy projects. It was the language of bartering justice for peace. I drew maps on envelopes, tracing routes between cities like veins. The pattern was ugly, a family empire maintained with favors and debts. My brother, Robert, accused me of sensationalism. He feared the legal fallout more than the moral one. But a friend, a former reporter, told me to look for patterns, not anomalies. We built a timeline. The Bridgeport transfer in 77, the Gilded Anchor tape in 84, Claire's letters starting in 85. It all started to make a horrifying kind of sense. At my father's memorial, I shared a redacted summary. The room split between disbelief and fury. My aunt said simply, "We deserved to know." The deeper I dug, the more the human cost emerged. A low-level city planner coaxed into approving things he shouldn't have. A school board member whose re-election was secured by our family's printer. I started to see my father at his desk, lamp haloed, making choices that would ripple through so many lives. And in a strange way, I began to forgive and condemn him at the same time. Then the rumors started. A Providence journalist called. I denied everything, an old reflex. But the lie felt polluted. The Wainwright name started showing hairline fractures. We brought in a mediator. The night before the meeting, I sat in my father's chair and read the original letter aloud into the dark. "If we do nothing," I said to the empty room, "we will be haunted not only by what he did, but by what we permitted after he died." At the meeting, a cousin slammed the table and said, "If we don't go public, someone else will." That changed everything. The choice crystallized. I could release the documents to the press, or bury everything and let the secret slowly poison us from the inside. I never expected to want the truth to be free so fiercely, or to fear its consequences so deeply. My finger hovered over the send button on an email to the Providence Ledger. And from the study, I heard the reel-to-reel whir one last time, as if a hidden tape had started playing on its own. The noise swelled, and a voice I didn't expect, my father's voice, said two words that made me drop the mouse and run for the study, "Not Claire." The reel dragged in the dark when I hit rewind. The tape popped like something wounded. My father's measured voice returned, "Not Claire." Those two words landed like a stone. My first thought was exculpation for the woman whose letters I had found. The sleuthing reflex born of weeks of paper told me exoneration often displaces blame. I sat on the study carpet, wood smelling of old smoke and ink, and waited for the next phrase. "Keep the ledger in Lowell's name. Marcus will be safe." Marcus. The name was both ordinary and terrible. Marcus Leary, who later became mayor of Providence in 1988, and a state representative through the late 1990s, whose face I'd seen on campaign posters and on Float's grin calibrated for crowds. To hear my father say Marcus tied our private transactions to a public life, the room tilted. I drove to the Providence archives with the tape in my pocket, like contraband on a cold March morning of March 3, 2012. The archivist pulled old campaign finance reports and meeting minutes. Marcus Leary's early career rose in the years of urban redevelopment in the 1980s, the same years my father's ledgers swelled. Dates knit into a sentence: Bridgeport purchase on March 3, 1977, a New Haven legal retainer in 1980, Marcus's first mayoral campaign in November of 1988. Once I saw Marcus's name on an invoice from the same printing company that made council pamphlets, I felt I had touched a live wire. The invoice for campaign materials traced through intermediaries to Lowell Holdings, the name Lowell repeated like code. I played the tape for Margaret in a parking lot smelling of salt and oil. She closed her eyes when Marcus's name dropped. "If Marcus falls," she whispered, "he will take much with him." I took the reel to Esther Levine, now teaching investigative students. She listened and smiled the dangerous smile of a cataloger. "You have more than accusation, Evelyn. You have a map to a power structure." She advised corroborating each payment, timestamping each tape, finding witnesses to speak under oath. Politics in Rhode Island, she warned, had teeth. A cautious piece ran in the Providence Ledger on May 5, 2012. Questions raised over Wainwright donations. Marcus Leary's office issued the standard denial the next day. "No improper conduct. Mr. Leary has always acted in the public interest." That denial bought time and rallied allies, but time costs. Alan Reyes, a former city planner, met me and described meetings where Claire Donovan, my father, and a Mr. Leary's representative discussed zoning variances that would make waterfront projects profitable. A meeting remembered with uncanny specificity, a red envelope, and the phrase, "Keep it under Lowell." He signed an affidavit. The affidavit transformed rumor into admissible fact. Marcus called a press conference on June 15, 2012, and denied any record of funds from Wainwright accounts. We had proofs, but proofs in politics require audience. Influence moves on a different axis than truth. The Wainwright Foundation Board convened on July 1, 2012, smelling of polished wood and lemon oil. Some demanded transparency. Others feared a misstep that could dissolve the foundation and its grants. They voted narrowly to commission an independent audit. When the audit came in late August of 2012, it named undocumented transfers and conditional grants. Accountants dress wrongdoing in measured terms. To those who had lost community projects and scholarships, the ledger language read as betrayal. Town halls filled, protesters gathered at our family home in early September, signs reading, "Accountability now," and "Where did our money go?" The voices were weary as well as angry. A long list of small harms finally had words. Inside the family, tempers frayed into litigation. Robert filed an injunction on September 19, 2012, to block disclosure of financial records, arguing that as executor, he had duty to protect the legacy. His fear betrayed a deeper terror of loss and humiliation. Discovery peeled back more layers. A wire on May 5, 1977, bounced through a Manhattan intermediary to Lowell Holdings, and then to an account controlled by initials ML. The initials were no longer cipher, but brand. Depositions read like theater. Claire Donovan testified with quiet strength. Under oath, she denied taking bribes or influencing zoning in exchange for favors. When asked about intimacy with my father, she said, "That is irrelevant to the city's welfare." Her refusal to be spectacle complicated narratives and earned both sympathy and suspicion. Then a former Lowell associate produced envelopes and a cashier's check stub and a letter in Marianne Lowell's hand dated August 1, 1978. Hold until Marcus asks. The year and the phrase were a velvet command. Marianne claimed to be a simple trustee, yet the handwriting suggested active conduit. Old photographs surfaced of my father laughing with men later indicted in unrelated corruption probes in the early 1990s. Pundits debated whether Providence's patronage was quaint nepotism or organized venality. Motive mattered. In my father's notes, I found phrases like, secure projects to maintain employment in neighborhoods, avoid scandals that hollow families. The language read like paternal rationalization. He had built dependence and used it to broker silence. The man who soothed my fever had also signed checks that bought obedience. Claire Donovan resigned from the Urban Planning Department in October of 2012 and left Providence. Her departure felt like exile. Meanwhile, neighborhood groups filed a class action suit alleging misappropriation of funds intended for public works from the late 1970s through the 1980s. The suit opened decades to scrutiny and threatened to unravel contracts and careers erected on old bargains. The courtroom became theater of memory. Witnesses recalled ribbon cuttings and pressured bids. Officials read contracts favoring a subset of contractors. The judge, appointed in 1999, listened like a slab of granite. Each answer produced new subpoenas and ledgers that once seemed mere bureaucracy. For me, the legal fight was both personal and moral. I sat through depositions, hearing my father called ambitious, generous, and at times overreaching. The court's demand for facts turned grief into evidence. In a February 2013 hallway pause, Margaret said, "We can't rebuild what he broke, but we can choose what to do now." That choice, restorative work versus accountability, became our fulcrum. Outside the courtroom, the Wainwright name slid from social capital into question. Board members resigned, donors withdrew pledges, galas lost their sheen. Marcus's televised interview forced him toward an ethics review. He stepped away from a committee chairmanship and later announced his resignation. Public silence became punishment. A hand-labeled ledger page for M surfaced. Projects, dates, amounts in my father's hand, initialed ML. The page was an incendiary nexus between public projects and the initials that aligned with Marcus Leary's accounts. Lawyers cross-checked every entry against contracts and campaign expenditures. The pattern formed, conditional funding securing contractors' success in return for political support. The circle had been cyclical and profitable. Human tragedies were recorded. Contractors excluded from bids, firms shuttered in the early 1990s, community programs that taught carpentry to teenagers cut off and closed. Damage was not hypothetical. It was lives and livelihoods. Negotiations in the spring of 2013 smelt of settlement. Marcus's team proposed a financial settlement without admission of guilt, funding for urban projects, and a public apology. City attorneys called it practical. Neighborhood leaders wanted criminal referrals and full transparency. The debate between pragmatic restoration and principle raged. A confidential affidavit from Marianne Lowell, niece, alleged that Marianne had been terrified in the late 1970s by threats if she revealed the ledger's holdings, an implication of coercion that recast custodial charity as an apparatus of intimidation. A park press conference in late June of 2013 saw Marcus announce a reparative fund and offer a scripted apology. His resignation in July felt both official and incomplete. My going public cost me. An August of 2013 defamation suit landed on my doorstep alleging harm to a contractor's prospects. I sat with my lawyer and weighed truth against silence. We prepared to defend facts. The trials of 2014, civil hearings, depositions, public testimonies, were crucibles. Witnesses described favors called in, bid manipulations, and small voices silenced with jobs and donations. Each testimony under oath chipped away at the myth of paternal benevolence. Amid the maelstrom, an unexpected ally emerged. My cousin Daniel rallied pro bono attorneys and pushed for reparative funds with independent oversight. His idealism gave work teeth. Together we drafted binding restitution proposals. Settlement talks dragged into autumn of 2014. Some groups accepted Marcus's cash offer and ethical reforms. Others demanded criminal referrals and rejected mere appeasement. Money could not fully restore a tarnished name. The Wainwright brand once opened invitations. Now it opened doors to questions. At a memorial in November of 2014, I felt eyes measure me as if taking inventories of culpability. In December of 2014, while sorting safety deposit box receipts, I found a key with a tag my father had hand-labeled, "Open, August 1st, 1978. He had intended someone to find it someday. After legal struggle in January of 2015, I opened the box and found a small velvet case containing a locket with a photograph of a child I did not know and a note in my father's hand. For the future, not for the city. The photo showed a boy with my father's eyes and the familiar Wainwright nose. The back bore the date August 1st, 1978. That small private revelation ruptured me in a way the ledgers had not. A secret lineage preserved in velvet suggested that the web of concealment included personal lives, not only finances. The locket detonated. It meant not only hidden accounts and conditional grants, but lives hidden under the ledger S columns. The phone rang after I held the small photograph in my palm. A low voice said, "Find him." Then the line went dead. I understood then that exposure had opened doors not only to lawsuits and apologies, but to people who had been kept in shadows and to others who would prefer to stay there. The house around me slumped like an old theater, waiting to see if the next act would end in collapse or confession. The cost of releasing truths many believed sacred was now a living thing, pushing relatives into alliances, public exposure into lawsuits, and private hearts into unexpected rearrangement. The story had not ended, it had only widened.